Everyone knows the main bread and butter of any Zelda game is its dungeons. It's where a big chunk of the gameplay takes place, and is what most players will remember most vividly about that specific entry in the series. Needless to say, good dungeon design in a Zelda game is about as important as Flute Guy being at the Game Awards. It's just required. However, not every single dungeon is a masterpiece. Every game in the series has a couple of bad apples, except for Link's Awakening in my opinion. Honestly, I feel this game has one of the best lineups of dungeons in the series. There really isn't a single one that I actively dislike, which makes deciding which one's the best a decent challenge. And, well, that's exactly what I decided to do. We'll be ranking every dungeon in Link's Awakening from worst to best, so let's hop right into it. To be honest, inside the Windfish's egg isn't really much of a dungeon in the grand scheme of things. All it really is a Lost Woods style maze that is randomized every playthrough, and the only way to know the correct path is to read a specific book in the library that can only be deciphered if you obtain the magnifying lens earlier in the game. That's pretty much it. Yeah, like I said, it's really not much of a dungeon. However, the game technically classifies it as one, so I had to put it on the list. If I had to say anything notable about it, I'd probably say that I really like how eerie the music and the area are all around. It offers a really great build-up with the fight with Deatheye. As you may know, the DX version of Link's Awakening was for the most part just a colorized re-release of the game on the Game Boy Color. But it did add some new content to the game. One of the biggest additions was the Color Dungeon. Get it? Color Dungeon because it's on the Game Boy Color? Isn't that hilarious? Okay, whatever. Anyway, this place can be tackled right after finishing the Key Cavern and obtaining the Pegasus Boots. And if you're willing to brave it, you'll receive either the blue or red tunic, which are very worth the trouble. Okay, so the reward is good. How's the actual dungeon, though?
I mean, it's alright, like...
It's home to some puzzles that are quite unique to this place and go with the whole color theme. It houses 3 unique bosses, including the Hard Hit Beetle, which is a pretty fun and unique fight. Well, unless you're playing the original version. Yes, game, I get it. You don't have to keep putting text on screen every time I take more than 4 seconds to hit him. And some key veterans to the series may notice the theme backing this place is actually a remix of the OG dungeon theme from Zelda 1. Who doesn't love a good throwback, am I right? Unfortunately, that's where most of the positives end. Not only is the color dungeon really short, but it's also a bit on the linear side for something at this point in the game, in my opinion. I get that it's an optional dungeon and all, but, you know, still. And something I find hilariously ironic about this place is how dull and gray it looks. You'd think a place called the Color Dungeon would be a bit more colorful, not just really generic with gray stone walls and such. The only thing colorful about this place is the bouncy floor tiles and color-coded switches. In conclusion, it's not a bad dungeon or anything, it just comes up feeling pretty bland, despite being called the Color Dungeon. Being the first dungeon in the game, the Tail Cave is pretty simplistic. It's pretty short, isn't very challenging, and is fairly straightforward. Pretty much everything you'd expect in the first dungeon of a Zelda game. Well, unless it's a Skyward Sword. But to be fair, it takes like 5 hours to get to the first dungeon in that game, so yeah, it doesn't count. Anyway, regardless, the Tail Cave is a solid enough first area to ease the players into the game. I do, on one hand though, find it really funny how the boss of this place is Moldorm, one of the most infamous bosses from A Link to the Past. Luckily though, it's nowhere near as obnoxious as the Link to the Past fight, but it still has the whole having to restart the fight if you fall thing, but it's not that bad. Okay, so first things first, I just gotta say what a huge missed opportunity it was to not have one of the newly added empty bottles in the Switch version to be located here. I mean, this place is called the Bottle Grotto for God's sake. How did you miss that opportunity? 0 out of 10 game design. Alright, jokes aside, just like the Tail Cave, the Bottle Grotto is a pretty basic dungeon. Not being too overly complex since it's still relatively early in the game. However, it does add more puzzles into the fray than the former. Some examples being the crystal switches appearing here for the first time in this particular game, which is something you'll see a lot throughout the other areas, as well as adding even more side-scrolling sections to the place, and even some torch puzzles. Altogether, these are all things that aren't too difficult for anyone to figure out on their first playthrough. Okay, I lied, there is one puzzle in this place, however, that is kind of bull***, not gonna lie. Basically, you have this room with a Pulse Voice, Keys, and a Stalfos. In order to progress, you have to kill them in a certain order. The only way of knowing said order is through an owl statue. So yeah, if you didn't get the Stone Beak earlier in this dungeon, then well, good luck figuring this crap out. If you couldn't tell by the name of this place, the Key Cavern has a lot of keys. No, like seriously, there are a lot of keys here. The place is even shaped like a goddamn key. Okay, to be fair, a lot of the other dungeons are also shaped after stuff as well, but still, point stands. But besides having a ton of keys, the dungeon is mainly built around the Pegasus boots which you obtain here. I guess something else is the fact that the Key Cavern happens to house quite a few enemies that don't appear anywhere else. You got these Bob-omb guys here that are either red or green, the latter being one of the creepiest enemies ever since they get the sadistic grin right before they kamikaze themselves. Seriously, what the hell, Nintendo? Then there's also these toucan looking ass things that won't stop teleporting all over the place. They are so annoying. God, it is so satisfying when you get the Pegasus boots so you can finally penetrate their asses with a sword.
I can explain.
Since we're on the topic of enemies, I might as well talk about the boss. As for it, well, it's one of the most forgettable fights in any Zelda game. Seriously, I completely forgot he even existed until playing through the game again for footage. It's just a giant blob that bounces around and you hit it in the eye. That's it. Thankfully, the boss is probably the only downside to the Key Cavern, and unlike him, between the assortment of unique enemies and the gimmick having a bunch of keys, this dungeon is quite a memorable experience. I don't think it's really far-fetched to say water dungeons in Zelda have kind of a bad track record. Most of them end up being really annoying and just not a very good time in general. However, there are actually a few good ones, believe it or not. The Angler's Tunnel being one example. Now granted, it's not some pinnacle of brilliance or anything special, but it is good nonetheless. There isn't some annoying mechanic like most other water dungeons in the series. In fact, it's fairly straightforward. I'd argue it's one of the easiest dungeons in the game. A good example as to why is that you were given the Stone Beak, map, and compass pretty much immediately, no strings attached. I always found that kind of weird. What's also weird is this place happens to give you one of the best items in the game, the flippers. Finally being able to swim opens up so many things previously unavailable. I don't know why Link needs these to learn how to swim, but that's neither here nor there. I will say though, the boss is a bit of a downside because it's really pathetic, especially in the original. Yeah, they buffed it in the remake and it's still this simple. I guess it kinda ties in with the easy difficulty though. Something tells me the devs may have originally planned for this place to be taken on earlier, but pushed it back later for whatever reason. Catfish's Maw has a pretty funny gimmick to it. Early on, you fight against one of the mid-bosses, Master Stalfos, yes, that's really his name, and before you can beat him, he runs away.
Okay.
Well, whatever, I guess we could just grab the dungeon item and be on our merry way.
Well,
So yeah, the main draw of this place is pretty much that this guy stole the dungeon item you need, so you have to hunt him down to obtain your prize. I think this is a really cool setup for a dungeon, not gonna lie. Also, for once, we're actually dealing with a smart villain. Not only is he smart enough to retreat from a battle he can't win, but he also knows not to let you obtain the hookshot, which is the main boss's weakness. Anyway, completely unrelated, something I find really amusing is the fact you can sequence break and completely skip the Goma mid-boss fight by performing a super easy jump over a certain staircase near the Nightmare's door. In fact, this is so easy to do, I honestly kind of have to wonder if this was intentional or not. I don't know. Overall, this place has a unique premise, is somewhat challenging, and is a lot of fun every time I play it. Unfortunately, many people don't seem to share the same opinion as me, since from what I can tell, this is the least popular dungeon in the game. If I had to guess, it's probably because this place, alongside its main mechanic, requires quite a bit of backtracking throughout it, which, yeah, I guess I can understand that. Eagle's Tower is widely considered to be the hardest dungeon in the game, and I'd have to agree with that statement. Even on repeat playthroughs, I sometimes find myself having a bit of trouble with this place. What you have to do here is probably one of the most metal things I've ever seen in a Zelda game. Since whoever built this place forgot to install a staircase to the 4th and 5th floors, seriously, a great building design there, 10 out of 10. Link decides to say screw and breaks all the pillars holding up the place so the higher floors can come down to him. What the f***? Yeah, great idea, Link. Definitely just bring a whole tower down with you still inside. That'll end perfectly. That isn't all the gimmicks this tower has in store for you though. Unlike in other areas where if you fall down a pit, you just respawn and take a little damage, instead here, you fall all the way down to the previous floor, which can really set you back quite a bit, especially if the crystal switch is set the wrong way. However, there is also parts where the dungeon requires you to use this concept in its puzzles, like where you have to jump down this specific hole to get this key. As for the boss, this battle is actually one of the very few fights in the game that is somewhat difficult. Also, the battle taking place on the very top of the tower is just a really cool setting. You know what isn't cool though? The boss's name. It's called the Evil Eagle. I am not joking. Bro, who came up with this crap? A 5-year-old? Okay, sure, a lot of the bosses in this game don't have the best names ever. I mean, you got stuff like Genie, Slime Eye, Slime Eel.
Escalators!
You get the point. They aren't great, but they're not as bad as Evil Eagle. Seriously, who thought this was okay? Why the hell am I going on such a big rant about this? It's not even that big of a deal. You know what, screw it, let's just move on to the next dungeon. When I was younger, if you asked me what my favorite dungeon in Link's Awakening was, I probably would have told you it was the Face Shrine. Obviously, my opinion has changed a bit since it's at number 2, but that doesn't change how great it is. Face Shrine has a bit of a subtle trait to it that some may not realize when playing. Early on, you may notice some oddities occurring such as floor tiles being flung at you, or this one room endlessly looping in upon itself. It's almost as if there's some invisible force at work here trying to prevent you from getting to the end. Once you do make it there, however, it's revealed that the dungeon itself is the boss. This is a really cool idea, and him being named Facade is just a stroke of genius. He can manipulate the floor and other objects within himself, which funny enough can be tied back to all those weird things that were happening. Even before you made it to him, he was already trying to kill you. Even without all of this place still has a lot to love, as it offers quite a bit of challenge in its puzzles, which mainly consist of crystal switches. The shrine utilizes these the most out of any area in the game, so being certain they're set to the right setting at certain points is a top priority. Also, the Face Shrine has a ton of ruby chests in it, most likely because you'll be required to buy the bow in the upcoming future if you hadn't already. So it's pretty nice of them to help you out there. And to top it all off is the music. Oh god, the music is just so great. It kind of has a bit of a somber feeling to it, which fits perfectly with everything going on at this point in the story. Probably up there as one of my favorite songs in the game. I know putting the last dungeon in first is kind of a cop-out, but I'm sorry, I really like Turtle Rock. Before you even enter, you have to fight the dungeon itself, which is really cool. It's like Breath of the Wild before Breath of the Wild, I don't know. Then, when you walk in, there's a lot going on. First up, lava. No final dungeon is complete without it. You know what else it needs? Some powerful enemies. Just about every mid-boss in the game is present with the exception of a select few. Unfortunately, this doesn't include this thing, since I find it really annoying. Then, of course, Turtle Rock is home to some pretty clever and challenging puzzles, including these Roomba vacuum-looking things that you not only use to fill in the holes in the floor, but also cross lava pools. And then, there's this certain puzzle that's just absolutely devious. Right before the dungeon item lies 3 crystals guarding it, and you know, as per usual, you have to hit a switch to flip them off. Only, there's a little problem. There's only one switch in the entire dungeon, and it's located near the beginning of the dungeon behind a bombable wall. So if you didn't find and hit it earlier, you gotta backtrack quite a bit. But hey, let's say you find the switch early on before you get here. Well, that's not good enough, as there is a point in Turtle Rock that requires you to leave the dungeon and re-enter through a different place to get a small key. Doing this, however, resets the switch if you already hit it. So not only do you need to find this thing beforehand, but you also need to hit it specifically after a certain part of the dungeon. This entire thing is so sadistic on the game dev's part, and for some reason, I find it hilarious and respect the hell out of it. All in all, this place is super fun, really challenging, has just about everything you can ask for in a final dungeon, and is a great way to end off Link's Awakening. And, well, that's my list. Just a reminder, this is just my opinion at the end of the day, so it's totally okay if you disagree with it. If you guys do have any differing opinions, be sure to let me know in the comments. In fact, let me know how you would personally rank these dungeons. Anyway, with that being said, that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all later. Have a good rest of your day.